Hey, I'm Julie and I'm the person behind Atelier Julie. So first of all, I'm really happy you are here, especially because it's my first video ever. So I'm really excited and I really hope you will like and enjoy it. In this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to sew the bow pillow, which is available in different sizes and very beginner friendly. I added the link of the pattern itself in the description down below. And yes, I think that's already it. I hope it will be helpful and I wish you a lot of fun. So let's start. This is what you will need for this project. First, a seam opener, even though I really hope you won't use it. Then a twig marker, or you can also use tailor's chalk, a matching needle for your fabric, and of course the matching threads and a bobbin depending on your machine, pins or clips, and also a seam gauge, and of course fabric scissors. I have a bigger one and a tinier one, and you can also use a measuring tape in case you don't have a seam gauge. Then you will also need the printed and prepared pattern. Here it's very important to check out the instruction PDF provided with your pattern before starting. So please look after it. And then you also need the fabric, of course, to sew the pillow. Now I will show you all the pattern pieces as an overview, so don't skip this part. First we have the cover piece, then we have the overlap, lining and bow pieces, and on each of them you will find all the relevant information about them. So for example, what's their name, how many times you need to cut it out, and so on. And what's very important here is on the cover piece, you can see that on the left side there are actually two lines. There is a wet line with the cut on fold symbol, and then there is a dotted white line. These two options are only visible on pillows bigger than 70 centimeters and only apply then. So there will be two options. The first one is when your folded fabric is wider than your cover piece. In this case, you don't have any problems. You can just use the wet line with the cut on fold symbol and put it normally on the fold of the fabric and cut it out, and then just continue straight with the tutorial. In case your cover pattern piece is wider than your folded fabric, we need to move on to option number 2 to be able to cut it out. So in this case, we will open up the fabric to be able to fit the cover piece on it. So once you open up the fabric, you will place the cover piece on it, and instead of cutting it out once, you need to cut it out twice and then sew it together. So in this case, you will use the dotted white line instead of the cut on fold wet line, because once you cut out both pieces, you need to put the right side on the right side and then sew them together at 1 centimeter. And then you will have one big piece exactly as the option 1, as if you cut it on the fold, and then you can just move on with the tutorial. Now that we are all set, we will start to cut everything out. In this video, I'm sewing the smallest pillow size, and before I start, I check all the pattern pieces and look what needs to be cut on the fold, where the grain line is, and so on. And if you are new to sewing and these words don't say anything to you, I highly recommend to you to check out the instruction PDF. I added a little glossary, so I think this will be pretty helpful. And here I start with the cover piece, which I place on the fold, as you can also see the symbol. Please remember the information I have given before. If your pattern piece is wider than your folded fabric, you need to use the other option and cut it out twice and then sew it together before continuing. But here it's not a problem, as my pattern piece is smaller than my folded fabric. So then I cut out everything and I'm done with this piece. Of course, you need to check with your fabric width how you can place the pattern pieces the most efficient way, so you don't need to throw too much fabric away. So please try out a little bit before cutting, so you are sure that everything will fit on it. Here I made sure that the grain line remains parallel to the selvage, and also the overlap piece is only needed once, so the fabric doesn't need to be laid double. Once we pinned everything correctly, we can already proceed to cutting everything out. You can also use normal scissors. In my case, I'm using an electric one. And for me, it's really a game changer because it's saving so much time. So here you can see that I finished everything. And then once I did that, I have a little trick for you. So I always mark the right side, so the good side of the fabric, with a little pin so I can recognize it later on. It's really useful, especially when both sides are looking very similar, so you will not get confused afterwards. And then I do this with the both pieces I already have, so the cover piece and the overlap piece. Now we can already proceed with the next pattern piece, which is the lining piece. And as you can see over here, we only did it once. So I place it again on the fabric, which is not folded, as otherwise I would have two pieces. And I look again that it's parallel to the fold of the fabric or the selvage, and then I just cut it out as well. And after that we will proceed with the bow straps. So the pattern piece is just called bow, and you will need to cut it out 6 to 8 times. This depends on which pillow size you are actually sewing. So for example, here I have the smallest one, so I will need 3 bows. So I will need 6 straps because one bow is made out of 2 straps. And to save a little bit of time, I folded the fabric, so I only need to cut it out once and will have 2 pieces at the same time. After that, I just repeat this step 2 more times, so at the end I will have 6 final cutted out bow pieces. And of course here as well I will mark with a little pin the good side of the fabric, so I will not get confused later on. Now that we cut out all the pattern pieces, we are finally ready for the next step, which is to actually prepare the bow straps. And for that we need to go over to the iron. Here we go. So we take our first strap, then we check that the good side, so the one with the pin, is facing down, and then we need to fold both edges at 1 centimeter all along. So you can take your seam gauge and just check if it's wide, or you can also use a normal measuring tape. And then you just do the first side, and after that you can continue with the next one. Always check in between if the margin is correct. And then once we did that, it will look like this. And then we will need to fold it one more time in the middle of this piece. So you can see how you need to do it over here. Then we need to repeat all of these steps for these 6 to 8 bow straps, depending on which pillow size you choose. And of course here I'm doing it really quickly, but please don't rush yourself and just take your time to do everything correctly. We are not done with preparing the straps now, because first we need to finish one end of them nicely before we can go on to sewing, which of course is the most fun part. I know you're already waiting for this. To do so, first we need to open up the strap, then we need to cut both ends diagonally, and after that we will just unfold the left side of the piece. Then we will fold everything down at 1 centimeter and finally fold it again back into the initial middle, and we will have a little pocket. And in this pocket you will tuck the other end in, and as you can see now we have a super nice finish, and then we only need to top stitch all along of it. Now finally onto the machine to top stitch all the way around, and to do so you first need to adapt your stitch length, so don't forget that. You can see my recommendation on the screen, but of course you're also free to use whatever you like. And then we will just go all around of the strap and stitch end 1 millimeter from the edge. Of course you are also free to change the needle positioning to have it easier. And then once we are done with that, we need to cut the threads, of course, and here you can see how the final result should look like. And after that we need to repeat it for the rest of the straps, so for the 5 or 7 straps, depending on how many straps you have in total. Once we did that, we need to transfer all the notches from the pattern on your fabric, and for this you will take your trick marker or your tailor's chalk, and then first check on the pattern where they are at. So for example here it's the placement of the bows, so you will redraw this exact line at the same placement on your fabric, so later on you know where to place your bow piece. Now grab your cover piece, because we'll start to insert the bow straps. For this we will first take the pins out, put the paper away and check where the notches are. Afterwards you need to unfold your cover piece and check that the right side is looking up, so it's the one with the pin. And then we will grab our first strap, and it should look like this, so be sure that you have the right end in your hand, and then place it nicely in the middle of your notch, so it really needs to be centered. And also while pinning, please check that the strap is parallel to the edge. Only this way we can be sure that it will look nicely in the end. Then continue to place the next bow straps on the marked notches. After this, we will proceed with the next pattern piece, which is the overlap piece. And here also we will start with taking the pins out, put the paper away, and then we check which side is the good side. And it's of course the one with the pin. And then we will put this one on top of the other one, so on the cover piece. And here it's important that the white sides are facing each other. So here you can see how I do it. So the pins are looking to each other, and then we will just pin them so it will stay together. The next step will be to sew both pieces together, and then you see once you will open it up, the straps will be stuck in between those pieces. And then here, when we will sew it, we will sew from one dot to the other one, so at the end we will have a really nice finish. And here you can see it from a bit near. So this is the dot we marked, and then yes, we will sew from this dot to the other one all along at 1 centimeter. But before we do that, we will first also prepare the neck straps on the other side. Here you see where you need to place them. It's just on the opposites of the cover piece. And then here as well, we just place them on the white side of the fabric, so you can also see the pin over there. And then we place them in the center of the markings and do it with all the straps. And here again, it's important to place them parallel to the edge of the cover piece. Here you see the final result, how it should look like. So they are all pinned nicely. And then as we also want to have a nice finish on this side, we will need the lining piece. It's the piece you cut out only once. And here also the straps needs to be stuck in between those pieces. So we will take the pins out, put the paper away. And then here again, the good sides should be facing each other. So the pin is looking to the other pin. So you just turn it around. And then again, we will pin those two pieces together. And then here we can sew all along, not from a dot to the other, but just all along. So here you can see how it should look like. Now back onto the machine and we will prepare all of this. So let's start. Here I take the pieces, both ends, and then I just sew them together. So let's start with these sides with the overlap piece. And here again, I look where the dot is. Of course, you could also just do it from one end to the other, but I prefer when it's looking nicely at the end and both seams are not crossing each other. So here I put my needle right into the middle of the dot and then I sew all along of it. And here I sew from 1 centimeter of the edge with a normal stitch length and just go all along. Of course, please think to take out the pins when sewing. Don't break your machine, so it's very important. Always take them out. And yes, here I will stop at the next dot. I did a little marking so you can see it a bit better. And yes, then I'm already done with this side of the cover piece and we will proceed with the other one. Here you can see it a bit from nearer. So we sew from one dot to the other one. And what we will do afterwards, for example, is to sew from exactly that dot the other seam. But this is for later. First, we will continue with the other side of the cover piece. So it's on the side where the other straps are. Here again, we just put everything nicely so we can sew it easily. And then we will just sew all along of this piece. At this point, also a little tip from my side. So I really recommend to cut off the loose threads after every seam. This way we don't need to serge them at the end and then clean the project afterwards by cutting them all off. Now we need to go over to the serger and run it only along the edge with the overlap piece we just sewed so that the fabric won't fray. And if you don't have a serger machine, that's absolutely not a problem. Instead, you can just use a normal zigzag stitch to enclose the edges. Back to the iron, we need to prepare everything for the next steps and it's always very helpful to iron in between every step so it's easier to sew afterwards. So here you can see where I need to iron so that everything is nice and flat. And then we need to prepare this edge to have a nice finish. So for that we need to fold it over at 1 centimeter first. You can again use your seam gauge or of course also your normal measuring tape. Here you can see how I do it. And what's really important here is that while you're folding it, that you check that you're on the correct side of the fabric. So here I would say we are on the bad side of the fabric, so not the right one, but the other one. As you can see, the straps are facing down. So if that's the case, you are on the correct side. Once we did that, we need to fold it over one more time at 3 centimeters. And then just iron it all along again. And yeah, just to see why we did that, after this we need to top stitch here at 1 millimeter from the edge to fix everything. And we also need to do the same at the other side again. So here we just iron it so that everything is flat again. To not have these straps in your way, you can also put them down so it will be easier to iron that way. Here again, we will also need to fold it at 1 centimeter first. So check again that you are on the correct side of the fabric. So here you see what I mean. So you don't put it up, but down. Yeah, to have it easier, I just throw the fabric over. So here you see how it looks like. You again take your measuring tape and then, yeah, we just iron at 1 centimeter. And then again at 3 centimeters, so you will really be at the edge of the straps. You can just pull the straps out so they won't be in your way. Now we will head back to the machine to fix everything we just ironed. Here we go. So I will show you a little close-up where exactly you need to top stitch. So it's really at 1 millimeter from the edge. And yes, also think about to adjust your stitch lengths again accordingly. And once we are finished with one side, we will just do the same on the other one. I didn't show it here, but as you can see, this is the final result at 1 millimeter, and the same, of course, also on the other sides, which I already prepared. Here you can see it. We are getting closer and closer to the end, but before we can continue with the next steps, we first need to iron again everything, as you can see here. Now we need to prepare the fabric to be able to sew the last seams, and at this point you should have one large fabric piece. And if you choose option number 2 at the beginning, there will be an extra seam running down the middle of the cover piece, which I don't have here. Then fold the side which includes the initial lining piece upwards and make sure the right sides are facing each other. To position it correctly, the straps must be placed directly on the opposite of each other. And then we need to align the folded fabric so that the edges sits very snug against the seam edge as shown. And yeah, also leave the overlap piece out of the way for now. Afterwards, pin everything together in this position so the pieces will stay in place in the meantime. Next, lay all the straps down flat and fold the overlap piece over it so that the bow straps end up underneath the overlap piece. And then pin again to prevent shifting and sew from the marked point straight down to the bottom edge. And if you used option number 2, you can sew down to the seam at the bottom. As I showed you before, we will now sew those 2 seams. So here again, from the marked point down to the bottom. And if you choose option number 2, you see where our folded fabric is at the end. There you will have a seam, and then you need to stop right next to this seam. Then we again, of course, cut all the loose threads so we don't need to do it later on. And we repeat the same on the other side. Pay attention here that all the layers are in the right direction and that nothing moves while sewing. Then we will proceed to overlock these 2 seams, as you can see here. As a little note, if you choose option 2 in the beginning, you know that you have one more seam at the end of this square, so at the side where I have my folded fabric now. So in this case, you also need to overlock this extra edge on top on the 2 we are doing now, so that you have at the end overlocked all 4 of the edges. In our case, we only have overlocked 3 at the end. Here again, if you don't have an overlock machine, it's not a problem, just zigzag stitch all along of the edges. But if you use an overlock, it's very important not to just cut off the ends of the thread, because then they can come loose later. So instead, secure them by stitching them in. To do so, use a needle with a large eye and slip it under the overlock loops in the opposite direction of the overlock seam. And in case that you don't have such a needle, you can also just finish with a small discreet knot. Then repeat this on all the 4 edges and we can finally move on to the final steps. Now that we sew everything, we only need to turn the fabric around, and to do so and to have very nice and clean edges, I recommend the technique I'm showing in the video. And once you did that to one edge, you can repeat it to all the 3 other edges. And after that, you can return the whole fabric and we only need to iron it one last time. And here you see how I do it. So check that everything is placed correctly before ironing it. And yes, that's already it. So we are finally done with our pillowcase, and I hope you are happy with the result and enjoy the step-by-step tutorial. I really hope it was helpful and that you are in love with your new pillow. And otherwise, I also added all the relevant information about this video in the description down below, so which material I use and so on. And yeah, I wish you a nice day or evening or whatever time it just is for you right now, and I hope to see you later.